Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Malloy from Adobe Systems. I run our Advanced Technology Labs, and I'd like to introduce very briefly our panel. The topic today is cloud computing, as it has been at least in one other panel, two if you count the infrastructure panel this morning. But we're going to take a slightly different tack on the cloud computing opportunity, which I'll explain in a second. To my immediate left, your right, is Noam Ziv, VP of Engineering at Qualcomm and a FiRe sponsor. Next to him is Mario Del Canto, CEO of SIMtone, a FiRe starter. If you haven't seen his work at the back of the room, then I encourage you to do that at the next break. And finally, Kris Halvorsen, Chief Information Officer at Intuit and a member of the CTO Design Challenge panel. So you've seen a lot of these folks, and you'll see more of them. But let's talk a little bit about cloud computing. We're going to look at the cloud phenomenon from the outside in. And by that, what I mean is, as a basic premise, I'm going to state, without much debate, I think, that clients are not going away. The users of computers and applications are still going to need to interact, and they're going to do that through clients of a variety of forms. And those clients are really going to represent the face of the cloud to that user. So what we're going to do is explore how those client devices and platforms and applications are adapting in the presence of the cloud. But let's start with a little historical perspective. In the large, folks, we're talking about distributed computing, reinvented and redefined a little bit. You all, I think, have experience with that in your backgrounds. Noam, perhaps you could start. Qualcomm is part of a distributed ecosystem, that great big distributed system known as a cell phone network. What's different about the cloud as it's being imagined, or perhaps hyped today, compared with that more traditional distributed system?
Well, sorry. The way I look at it is that functionality, as bandwidth increases, functionality can be transferred, as we heard earlier in the morning, between different locations. And so cell phones have evolved over the years from literally a phone that got a dial tone and you could speak over to a computing platform. And with its evolution and the evolution of, or the constant increase in bandwidth and connectivity, many more opportunities arise to not just offer different services, but to partition them differently depending on the need. So if you need more memory, more access to resources, you could move it to the cloud, as it's described before. But on the other hand, there are over 4 billion cell phones in the world, and they can be used as nodes or elements of the cloud that can either participate in generating data, but in reality, at some point, they can participate in processing it as well. So as bandwidth increases, capabilities of computing increase on the platforms, the partitioning becomes not just dynamic from the point of view of how can I maintain availability, but also on a per application base. You can make these dynamic decisions.
Great. Mario, you've got a very diverse background, but it includes Sun Microsystem, which has been talking about the network as the computer for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
How does that fit in, and your experience fit into the emerging cloud?
Well, certainly, referring to your prior question as well, I agree with Noam. The partitioning of the client-server architecture is going to change. And in some ways, Sun's vision of the network as the computer may finally come to reality. We look at it from our perspective in a relatively simple way, maybe simplistic for the purposes of this discussion, but if you have cloud computing, if your computer is in the cloud, if your environments are in the cloud, if your applications are in the cloud, and they become services, why do you need a computer to access the cloud? And that's sort of the simple way that we describe the problem, and sort of the underpinning of what we believe will be the change in the client environment. Many things that today are done by what you have in your hands, whether it's a phone or it's a computer, as we call it, laptop, you call it what you want, will be done also in the cloud. And so the client or the PC will transform itself, it will become cheaper, it will become safer, no data will be lost, state will remain persistent, which means you will change the device, but your work that you just left a second ago on the prior device will remain exactly in the same situation when you change to the next device. Everything will become simpler, safer, and more mobile. What exactly will happen, I don't think anybody knows. We're all working on it, but I think that's the direction.
Kris, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think Noam was very close to the center of what I think is different this time. Just scale. Scale, actually, a number of devices and clients are connected in, because it's these clients, these devices that are connected that will bring distributed computing, grid computing, utility computing, cloud computing to all of us. So if you have 4 billion cell phones, you have 2 billion desktops, you have smaller devices. If you don't have the client, it's like having a computer without a screen. It's what brings experience to everybody. And I think that is so different now, that there are so many endpoints connected to real users.
Great. Well, that's a great introduction. I have a few more questions. I'm almost not sure where to start, but there are a few yeah buts that come along frequently when discussing the cloud. And probably the one that people hear about most often is security and confidentiality. So Kris, I'd like you to start on this one. Intuit handles some of the user's most sensitive information, and if I'm not mistaken, you are storing it with their permission up on servers right now.
Our servers.
Your servers, that's right. I realize that it's a pre-cloud environment, but
It's their cloud.
will users be comfortable storing that information in the cloud? Do you feel like they're going to be comfortable with it? And in general, can vendors overcome the impression that information is less secure in the cloud?
Well, it's a good question. You know, security is not an absolute state. It's a delta between the threat and your ability to protect yourself and your customers from it. First, I don't think anybody should feel really comfortable. And second, as was touched on in the first panel, when you have companies really adopting this, the providing of infrastructure and platform as a service as their core competency, I trust that over time, they will become better at safeguarding the data, keeping things running, than anybody else who doesn't have it as their core business proposition. But at the same time, it's over time that they'll get to that state. So as this revolution in how computing power is being provisioned is evolving, there will no doubt be a gap from the day when you can provision storage, computance, bandwidth, and the day when each of these vendors can be counted on to have as tight security as a company like ours, who I think is very focused on maintaining confidentiality of the data and private identifiable information in general, can be. So I think we need to really just look at what the state of each vendor and the state of evolution of this practice is. The other problem with this, though, is that different data from different countries pertaining to different tasks, there are different conditions around the treatment. And so even if a vendor has great perimeter security and it's all encrypted, et cetera, your application takes care of that, you have compliance requirements. Like, for example, there's data that we have that we are not allowed to store outside of the United States.
Yeah, right.
So there are these gradations and distinctions where you cannot depend on the infrastructure or the platform provided to you as a service.
Mario, it seems like you're going to be pretty dependent on this to make SIMtone successful. What are your thoughts?
Well, security is paramount, in my opinion, not only to SIMtone or to the cloud computing world, to the evolution of computing of the digital economy. And I fully agree with you, by the way, that there are so many dimensions to that problem that we probably will not even be able to touch on all of them briefly. The one thing that, to me, and I'm speaking as a user, scares the most always is there's two actually fundamental things. People getting somehow into my computer and doing what I don't know or I don't want them to do. And second, me losing my computer. So cloud computing, if we go with a full-blown, let's call it stateless cloud, meaning the cloud owns everything, owns the logic, owns the client, owns the application, the data, obviously, and there is nothing else. Data never transverses the firewall because I only use a device that essentially is a remote control. That would make me very comfortable from resolving my loss of data and my whether it's because I lose my device or because someone sniffs it into it. The other thing at that point is who's going to get into the cloud. Now we patented a solution which we think is very cool that even the DoD uses that allows the cloud to remain sitting behind a closed firewall, yet accessible to the authorized users. And that, I think, will add more comfort to the transition, which is evidently cultural anyway, but fundamentally, nobody keeps their cash under their mattress today, or maybe recently that has changed.
Not until recently.
But for the most part. So, you go to a bank, you have a trusted institution, it is your cloud money holder, if you want. And we think that will move, information will go that way as well. There's just
so is SIMtone biting off that problem, or are you relying on your underlying infrastructure provider?
We definitely bite off the protection of data, access to data and access to applications. I always warn people that that's not the panacea, because clients not only are used by the user, but that, as we all know, talk to each other. Just a browser that accesses the internet accesses in a stateful way another server, and that's a vehicle for intrusion. There are solutions for that. We are not the company that addresses those kind of data protection issues, but we definitely have addressed aggressively the access issue and the data loss.
Okay.
So I have a slightly different twist on this, because I'm finding out that users, well, first of all, both solutions, I believe, will exist for a long time. And if you follow the curve, I don't know where we are on this edge or that edge, but there'll always be tails, just like there's still people who keep cash under the mattress.
Sure.
But the thing that I find people battling with is, okay, what is my fear of jeopardizing my information or the content of the data that I have versus what is the convenience that's being offered to me? Mm-hmm. And each individual seems to make their own choice at some point in time. And when the convenience, the services that are offered outweigh in people's mind the risks associated with using that model, is when you see things switch. And one example is healthcare. We have Microsoft, Google, and others have created these health vaults, and there's all these questions around, is the data safe? I'm not putting my medical data in there and whatnot. But when there are enough applications that make use of this data, and you say, look, I currently don't have any access that I've collected over the last 30, 40 years from my doctor. Wow, there are advantages here. I'm willing to take the risk. And yeah, it helps when it's a trusted entity. That's what sways, I believe, individuals from deciding which model works for them.
A big advantage of the cloud for solution providers is that it homogenizes the infrastructure. It allows those of us that create applications and solutions to target either one environment or a smaller collection of environments. But as I said, clients aren't going away, and users love the diversity of client devices. So my next question is, what do we do to preserve the diversity on the client side while we're exploiting the homogenization that the cloud offers?
Oh, I think the users love some amount of diversity. I have a feeling that we may have gone overboard at times, and that what they really care about is the diversity of functionality, but not necessarily of different interaction paradigms, et cetera. So it is important that we support a range of functionality, but this may provide an opportunity for us to kind of pull back, take a second look at how much of the buttons and how many of the features do we really need, and then get to some simplification. The other thing I think, when you have this paradigm shift, I think this is a paradigm shift, you also have to expect that people go after new problems. And that was touched on here in the discussions yesterday, that whereas many people look at cloud computing as being an opportunity to optimize, it is also an opportunity to solve new problems. We already see that with the amount of collaboration that's being supported naturally when you put things in the cloud. That's kind of what's invited, sharing it, which is not at all what was the common use of computation in the past. So yes, I think that diversity is important and appreciated more on the functional level than on the feature level. And I think also for us to be open to there being a shift now to new tasks that are most appropriately tackled in the cloud is actually an opportunity to uncover new value and new delight.
I completely agree with that. You know, for example, if you look at PCs or even in some of these smart cell phone platforms, by virtue of necessity, a lot of processing memory, other parameters or capabilities that can be made available in the cloud have found themselves into and tend to overcomplicate the user experience of the device. If you think of this dynamic nature of resource availability and connectivity that's enabled in this new model, then you can start stepping back, as you pointed out, Kris, and saying, okay, well, there's a function that says data has to go from a device to somewhere. There's a function that says I either store it or process it, and there's feedback that needs to be sent to the user. And why does it always have to go to the same device? Why can't I start decoupling these things and just move functionality where it best fits for cost, connectivity, delay, and all these other metrics?
Well, we've agreed so much, but I'm going to be contrarian here for a minute. Can you bring up the lights for a minute? I'm going to conduct a little impromptu poll here. Can we bring up the lights? Everybody that is a iPhone owner, raise your hand. Oh, wow.
Okay.
How about BlackBerry? We got some BlackBerry owners? Now, every BlackBerry owner that's willing to trade their BlackBerry for an iPhone, raise your hand. Okay, we got 1, 2,
me too.
3. Every iPhone owner that's willing to trade their iPhone for a BlackBerry, raise your hand. I got 1 in the back. 2, 3, 4. Okay. But my point is that those devices basically provide the same function. They provide it in a very different way, and they're adding unique value by that diversity. So I'm not quite sure that users are going to give up on diversity quite as quickly as we're perhaps hoping from a solution provider. It would clearly be easier for us if, well, I would go so far as to say that that iPhone hadn't made multi-touch popular. But now that we've used it, I don't think anybody's going to give it back.
Yeah, but
Mary, I didn't give you a chance. Did you want to add anything?
I was actually nodding because that the iPhone is the example that that validates your point. I believe, though, we ought to start looking at we ought to think in the cloud computing vision of everything which is somewhere else, and where the devices, as you were saying before, becomes essentially a remote control. And in that sense, I will add one level of complication for a moment. Imagine if, at the birth of television, every television channel was broadcasted to its own set. How many of us would own a television today? None. The market would not exist. Maybe 3 people who really wanted it, but that's it. In the cloud computing world, services will be available. And there will be hundreds of millions of services. And you really want to have an access system that provides the market and the users and the customers with the diversity of devices that absolutely, I agree with you, Tom, will be necessary. I mean, people that make devices, and the iPhone is the example, deliver value by delivering the device itself. So that is not going to go away. But those devices must allow access.
Absolutely.
And
Nobody's
really
brought
don't-
up standards, but we're going to move on, but I would posit that
Steve would not agree with me, by the way, but that's okay.
you're in good company. Standards, I would posit, are going to be key to this. The interesting thing, which we don't have time to talk about, is exactly what standards and at what levels of the stacks. But as we understand the cloud and the relationship with the client adequately, I think those standards will, in fact, allow us to have our cake and eat it too.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we have about 8 minutes. So if we get through this question quickly, we'll open it up to the audience for a few minutes. And just to wrap it up, I'd like to throw out a pretty broad question, which is, let's take the customer perspective here at the end. How do you think that the customer's experience is going to change and their interaction and engagement with this distributed system? What's going to be different? What are they going to notice as the advantages and disadvantages of the new modes of operation that are emerging?
I think if they notice, then we've failed. These transformations can be successful if from the user we've made their life easier. That the devices, the services, the content that they want to interact with, if it's intuitively available to them in the way that they want, in the format that they want, when they want it, wherever they want it, we've succeeded. And that's where this fluidity comes to help us. If people have to whip up their device or turn on their whatever computer and say, oh, wait, today I want to use a cloud service, but tomorrow I want to, well, we're already there, right? You can choose whether you want to upload stuff to the website or not. So,
Yeah, I agree. Simplicity of the user experience, along with the quality of the user experience, is paramount to make the cloud computing market huge. It will not happen without that. That's my personal opinion. I don't know if you disagree, but.
No, I agree with you that maintaining some amount of homogeneity and simplicity in the interaction is essential. I think the experience may change dramatically at another level. I think with the barrier of entry for developers and solutions providers to being lowered, because it is much easier now to stand up an environment, to try something out, to reach customers through one of these cloud providers. Cameron talked about the launch of a widget that without the infrastructure there would have been much harder to get out and up. And I think that innovation will be spurred. We think ourselves as a company that tries to be innovative. Now we have an opportunity to make our developers more innovative by sharing data, our assets with them, help them build new applications around our assets, and other people can, again, build on top of their output. And I think that cycle is one that's never been enabled before in the way that it will be. So I think the options and the experience from that perspective will just be richer.
Yeah, in fact, if I may add one additional thing, I think the advantage of cloud computing is that it will remove, for the developer, the complexities of having a distributed target environment, which is unknown, unmanageable, and difficult to control, and therefore, as a result, deliver services and applications which are much better from a user perspective. It will also allow, and I think this is really important, a very substantial simplification of the experience that the user has to go through today in order to get to the point where he can use that service. I find it extraordinarily complex. And I look at, the non-technical, passionate people, my wife, who has a PhD and can't get voicemail from a cell phone still, and she will never be a customer of a great laptop or laptop with a browser application. It's just too complicated.
Well, I think that's a great point, and it was one that I was waiting to come out because personally, I think if we think about it in terms of killer applications, which is oversimplifying it, that, and I mentioned this to somebody around a drink table last night, I think a possible killer application is the elimination of me and probably all of you as the home IT administrators, or the great reduction of our burden. I know I would pay a monthly fee to not get certain calls at certain times of the day about the home IT.
You don't have a spreadsheet with IP addresses?
Actually, I do.
Yeah, there you go.
I do. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? There's one back there.
I wish you would ask the audience how many own both a BlackBerry and an iPhone, and
All
then
right.
ask them how many of them wish they could give away both of them.
All right, how many own one of each? And how many want to give them both away?
Everybody.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, what's the economic model? Suppose it's Microsoft Word or some, I'm a developer and I'm looking for, usually I sell a packaged product, but now my product's going to be up on the cloud. Are the end users going to expect to be able to use my product for free like they do so much other stuff on the internet?
Should I take it?
Go for it, Mario.
Good for you.
My impression is that the cloud computing model will open up business possibilities that are impossible to implement today for a developer, for a software vendor. For example, I think we have living proof here. Intuit is a great software vendor. They went on the cloud and they're doing extremely well. Going forward, the ability to implement distribution methodologies which are based on-demand subscription type of recurring revenue or non-recurring revenue, or which are very, very hard to implement and costly today, given the distributed deployment environment, will be cheaper, faster, and much better. The developer world also in the cloud will have the ability to innovate faster and in a simpler and in a much more inexpensive way, creating communities around their products and so forth. I believe it's a phenomenal opportunity for software vendors. That's my position.
So I'll offer a slightly different view on this, because we heard in some of the previous panels some of the economics that come with these higher speed wireless technologies and whatnot. And at the end of the day, nothing is free. Somebody has to pay for everything because it costs money. It costs money to get the infrastructure, to host, develop the software, and eventually people expect returns. And so I believe that one of the biggest challenges, as you pointed out, is how do these pricing systems evolve? It's no longer I just buy it and own it, or I lease it, or it's ad supported. There has to be a lot of, I believe, innovation in a space that has been almost static, that says, look, there are different ways to collect from many different sources, maybe small amounts. We heard micropayments coming up here in a different context, to make these kind of ecosystems actually succeed.
Well, coming from packaged software vendors, both Tom and I know that it is a real challenge. It's a good question. The availability of free services definitely raises the bar on the value you have to deliver in order for you to expect to get paid if you're not on a millions of users and advertising model. But at the same time, I think that this is an opportunity to innovate and deliver more value. So people, if you deliver them something that really makes their lives significantly better, as you said, in terms of taking away the need to be the home IT administrator, there will be money to be made.
Okay. And the clock just ticked down to 0. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.